In 1998, the crew of Space Shuttle Endeavour was conducting the first assembly mission for the International Space Station. Mission STS-88, December 11th. During a routine photo survey, they captured something that should not exist. A black, angular object tumbling through the void. NASA called it a thermal blanket. Lost during an EVA. Case closed. But the object in those photographs matched descriptions dating back a century. Descriptions of something that was in orbit before humanity had the ability to put it there. Something that Tesla heard. Something the Navy tracked. Something that might have been watching us for 13,000 years. This is the documented history of the Black Knight satellite. Colorado Springs, 1899. Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments in his laboratory, testing equipment designed to detect electromagnetic disturbances. He was trying to track thunderstorms. Instead, he found something else. A repeating signal from space. Not random cosmic noise. Structured. Mathematical. Tesla wrote in his notes that the signals came in groups. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Repeat. He believed he had detected communication from Mars or Venus. The scientific community dismissed Tesla's claims. Space was silent, they said. Radio waves from other planets were impossible with the technology of 1899. Tesla was hearing atmospheric phenomena. Nothing more. But Tesla insisted until his death that he had received alien communication. He spent years trying to build equipment to respond. He never succeeded. Or if he did, he never told anyone. 1928. 29 years after Tesla's detection. Amateur radio operators around the world began reporting an unusual phenomenon. Long-delayed echoes, LDES. They would transmit a signal and receive their own transmission back seconds or sometimes minutes later. Not a normal echo that bounces off the ionosphere in milliseconds. These delays were impossible according to physics. Eugen Hals, a Norwegian engineer, was the first to document the phenomenon professionally. He sent a letter to physicist Carl Stormer describing signals that returned 3 to 30 seconds after transmission. The delays varied with no pattern that matched any known atmospheric or geological phenomenon. Stormer confirmed Hall's observations. So did radio operators in Holland, France, and the United States. The echoes were real, but no one could explain them. Some suggested they were bouncing off layers of ionized gas. Others proposed reflection from the moon. But the math did not work. The delays were wrong. The signal strength was wrong. Everything about LDES was wrong. Stanford professor Ron Bracewell would later propose that LDES could be caused by an alien probe retransmitting signals to announce its presence. A probe in orbit around Earth, recording and replaying radio transmissions. But that theory would not come until 1960. In 1928, the radio operators simply logged the anomalies and continued their work. May 14, 1954. The St. Louis Dispatch published an extraordinary claim. Dr. Lincoln La Paz of the University of New Mexico had detected 2 objects orbiting Earth. This was 3 years before Sputnik. 3 years before humanity officially put anything in orbit. La Paz was an expert on meteorites and atmospheric phenomena. He knew the difference between natural objects and something else. The objects were in polar orbit, La Paz claimed. One at 400 miles altitude, the other at 600 miles. They were not meteorites. They were not atmospheric anomalies. They were solid objects following stable orbital paths. The Pentagon allegedly asked La Paz to stop talking about his discovery. He complied. August 23, 1954. Aviation Week magazine reported that the U.S. Air Force had detected 2 natural satellites orbiting Earth. Natural was the key word. If they were not artificial, they could not be Soviet. The Cold War was escalating. Any unknown object in space was a potential threat. But calling them natural avoided panic and political complications. The official story changed multiple times. First, the satellites were confirmed. Then they were denied. Then they were confirmed again but described as asteroids temporarily captured by Earth's gravity. Then all mention of them disappeared from official records. February 1960. A more dramatic development. The U.S. Navy detected a large object in polar orbit. Not a small satellite or piece of debris. Something massive, dark, tumbling, in an orbit that no nation on Earth could achieve with existing technology. Time magazine reported the discovery in their March 7, 1960 issue. They described it as a dark, tumbling object in a polar orbit at 79 degrees inclination. The Soviets could not achieve polar orbit yet. Neither could the Americans. But something was up there. The Navy tracked it for weeks. It appeared on radar screens across North America. NORAD assigned it the designation 1960-001A. Then, abruptly, all tracking ceased. The object was reclassified as debris from the Discoverer 8 satellite. But Discoverer 8 was in an equatorial orbit, not polar. The explanation made no sense. Here is what Time magazine did not report. According to documents declassified in 2012, the object was not just reflecting radar. It was responding. When radar pulses hit it, it sent back a modified signal. Not a simple echo. A processed return with a different frequency signature. As if the object had received, analyzed, and retransmitted the radar pulse. The analysts who noticed this anomaly were told it was equipment malfunction. Interference from Soviet jamming. Atmospheric distortion. Anything but what the data suggested. That the object was actively communicating. May 15, 1963. Mercury 9. The final flight of the Mercury program. Astronaut Gordon Cooper was completing his 22nd orbit when he reported seeing a glowing green object approaching his capsule. He watched it through his window, tracked it on his instruments. It was real. It was there. It moved with purpose, not like debris. Cooper reported the sighting to Muchia Tracking Station in Australia. Over 200 personnel at Muchia saw the object on their screens. It was tracked for several minutes before disappearing. Cooper was told not to discuss it publicly. NASA's official transcript of Mercury 9 makes no mention of the incident. But Cooper talked about it after retirement. He insisted throughout his life that he had seen a constructed object, not space debris or atmospheric phenomena. He believed it was monitoring his capsule, evaluating human space capability. Cooper became a firm believer in alien visitation until his death in 2004. Between 1963 and 1998, reports continued sporadically. Astronomers detected anomalous objects. Radar operators tracked things that should not exist. Ham radio enthusiasts recorded impossible signals. But without photographic evidence, these remained anecdotes. Curiosities filed away in the margins of official records. The Soviet Union had its own encounters. In 1979, at a ground tracking station in Siberia, technicians allegedly decoded a repeating numerical sequence from an unknown orbital source. The numbers appeared random at first, but when plotted as coordinates, they marked locations on Earth. Not current locations. The coordinates matched where Earth's magnetic poles would be in approximately 12,000 years, based on magnetic drift calculations. The implications were staggering. Something in orbit was broadcasting information about Earth's distant future. Information that required advanced understanding of planetary magnetics and geological timescales. The Soviets classified the findings immediately. The station was shut down. The technicians were reassigned. The recordings disappeared into state archives. December 11, 1998. STS-88. The first ISS assembly mission. During EVA activities, astronauts photographed an unusual object floating near the shuttle. The images show a black, angular shape against the blue curve of Earth. It is clearly artificial, metallic, but wrong somehow. The angles do not match any known spacecraft or debris. NASA's explanation came quickly. It was a thermal blanket, lost during the EVA. The astronauts had accidentally released it while working. Simple mistake. Case closed. The images were archived and forgotten by the public. But the mission transcripts tell a different story. Transcripts that were partially classified and only released through Freedom of Information Act requests years later. During the encounter with the object, crew members reported anomalies that do not match a drifting blanket. Commander Robert Cabana's sealed debriefing mentioned metallic sounds against the shuttle's hull. Rhythmic, deliberate, like knocking. The sounds synchronized with the object's tumbling rotation. When it faced the shuttle, the knocking started. When it rotated away, silence. The pattern repeated for 12 minutes. Mission specialist Jerry Ross reported that his helmet radio picked up interference whenever the object was in direct line of sight. Not static, something else. He described it as a rhythm, like breathing, or a heartbeat. The interference was recorded by the shuttle's communication system, but the files were corrupted. Officially corrupted. What remains of those files was recovered by civilian researchers in 2007. 16 seconds of audio. When played, it sounds like a deep, rhythmic pulse. Biological but also mechanical, like something alive transmitting through metal and vacuum. NASA maintains the sound is compressed data from a malfunctioning sensor. They have never explained which sensor or what data. The thermal blanket explanation has other problems. The object's trajectory was analyzed by amateur astronomers using the published photographs. Its motion did not match a recently released object. It was in a stable orbit, not the chaotic tumble of fresh debris. It had been up there for a while, possibly a very long while. Connect these incidents across a century. Tesla's signals, the LDES, the pre-Sputnik satellites, the Navy's responsive object, Cooper's green visitor, the Soviet coordinates, the STS-88 photographs and sounds. They form a pattern, a consistent presence in Earth orbit that predates human spaceflight and continues today. The Black Knight satellite. That is what researchers call it. The name comes from medieval terminology. A Black Knight was an unknown warrior who appeared at tournaments with no heraldry, no identification. They fought and disappeared without revealing their identity or allegiance. The orbital object is our Black Knight, present but unidentified, active but unexplained. The conventional explanations are numerous. Space debris, misidentified satellites, thermal blankets, spent rocket stages. Each incident has been explained away individually, but collectively, they resist simple dismissal. The timeline is too long, the descriptions too consistent, the behaviors too anomalous. Consider the orbit. Multiple observations place the Black Knight in polar orbit at high inclination. This is the most difficult orbit to achieve. It requires more energy than equatorial orbits. In the 1950s and 60s, no Earth nation could reliably achieve polar insertion. Yet something was already there. The polar orbit is significant for another reason. It allows complete Earth observation. Every point on the planet passes beneath a polar orbit twice daily. If you wanted to monitor Earth comprehensively, polar orbit is optimal. Whoever put the Black Knight up there chose the perfect vantage point. Ancient cultures might have known about it. Myths worldwide describe watchers in the sky, sentinels appointed by the gods to observe humanity. The Norse had Heimdall, who could see everything from his celestial post. The Dogon people of Mali have legends of the Namo, beings from the star Sirius who watch Earth from above. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki's celestial chariots that orbit endlessly. These myths predate telescopes, predate any ability to observe orbital objects. Yet they consistently describe something watching from above, something placed there by higher beings, something that reports back to its creators. The Dogon traditions are particularly specific. They describe an object they call the guardian of the threshold. It circles Earth in a path that takes it over both poles. It has been there since before the flood. It will remain until the creators return. The Dogon claim this knowledge came from the Namo themselves, fish-like beings who arrived from the sky in ancient times. Skeptics dismiss these as coincidences, myths retrofitted to match modern observations. But the Dogon knew details about Sirius that were not confirmed by astronomy until the 20th century. They knew about its binary nature, its orbital period, its invisible companion star. If they were right about Sirius, could they be right about the Guardian? Duncan Lunnan, a Scottish researcher, made a startling discovery in 1973. He analyzed the LDE data from 1928, looking for patterns. When he plotted the delay times as points on a graph, they formed a map. A star map, specifically, a map of the constellation Boötes as it appeared 13,000 years ago. 13,000 years ago, the star Epsilon Boötes was the pole star, not Polaris. The map seemed to indicate origin from that star system, as if the probe was saying, "This is where I came from. This is when I arrived." Lunnan later retracted his interpretation, saying he had made errors. But other researchers have replicated his work and found similar patterns. The LDES contain information, mathematical relationships, possibly coordinates, possibly messages. The signals Tesla heard in 1899 might have been the same phenomenon, the black night announcing itself to a species just developing radio technology. But announcement implies passive observation. The evidence suggests something more active. The Navy's 1960 detection showed response to radar. Not reflection, response. The object received, processed, and retransmitted. It was listening, understanding, answering. The Soviet coordinate transmission takes this further. If accurate, the black night was not just observing present Earth. It was calculating future states. Predicting magnetic pole migration requires understanding of core dynamics, tectonic movements, solar interactions. Either it had been observing long enough to extrapolate these patterns, or it had access to data we do not have. Why broadcast future pole positions? A warning? A test to see if we could decode it? Or something else? Magnetic pole shifts can be catastrophic. They have coincided with mass extinctions. If the poles shift dramatically, navigation fails, the magnetosphere weakens, radiation increases. Civilization could collapse. Is the black night warning us or counting down to a known event? The STS-88 encounter suggests active interaction. The knocking on the hull, the biological sounds, the synchronized behavior. These are not properties of passive observation. The black night was responding to human presence, trying to communicate, or trying to get inside. Some researchers believe the black night is not just one object. The various sightings might be multiple probes, a network of watchers. The 1954 detection reported 2 objects. Other observations mention formations of dark satellites. Perhaps there is an entire constellation of black nights, each monitoring different aspects of Earth. The triangulation possibilities of multiple satellites would allow precise measurement of everything on Earth. Every radio signal, every rocket launch, every nuclear test, the growth of cities, the spread of pollution, the rise and fall of civilizations, all recorded, all transmitted to somewhere else. But transmitted where? Epsilon Boötes is 203 light-years away. If the black night is 13,000 years old and from that system, its creators launched it knowing they would not receive data for centuries. Unless they have faster than light communication, or unless they are much closer than Epsilon Boötes. The moon would be an ideal relay station, close enough for real-time monitoring, far enough to avoid detection until recently. Several Apollo astronauts reported anomalous sightings on the lunar surface. Structures that should not exist, lights in craters, objects that moved between observations. NASA buried these reports, but they persist in leaked documents and deathbed testimonies. If the black night is transmitting to the moon, who is receiving? An automated station? An occupied base? The descendants of whoever launched the probe? The questions multiply with each assumption. The horror is not that we are being watched. It is that the watching might be ending. The increase in sightings and interactions suggests a change in the black night's behavior. For 13,000 years, it observed quietly. Now it is making contact, sending coordinates, knocking on our vehicles. The countdown that began in prehistory might be approaching 0. Consider the timeline. 13,000 years ago was the end of the last ice age. The Younger Dryas, a period of catastrophic climate change that destroyed the megafauna and nearly ended humanity. Some researchers link this to a comet impact, others to solar flares. But what if it was deliberate? What if the black night was placed to monitor the recovery? Earth might be a controlled experiment. The black night, a sensor package monitoring our development. When we reach certain milestones, it reports back. Radio technology in 1899. Orbital capability in 1957. The builders receive updates and decide whether to intervene. The coordinates transmitted to the Soviets pointed to magnetic pole positions 12,000 years in the future, close to the orbital period since the Black Knight's proposed arrival. Complete cycle. Perhaps it is programmed to monitor for fixed periods. When the time expires, it signals for collection or replacement. Or worse, it signals for termination. If Earth is an experiment, experiments eventually end. The data is collected. The subjects are disposed of. The laboratory is sterilized for the next trial. The Black Knight might not be a passive observer but an active participant in a cycle of creation and destruction. Recent developments support this darker interpretation. Since 2019, reports of anomalous orbital objects have increased dramatically. The U.S. Space Force, established in 2019, lists tracking unknown objects as a priority mission. They have detected things that demonstrate capabilities beyond current human technology. Objects that change orbit without propulsion, that appear and disappear from tracking, that seem to respond to observation. In 2021, a classified briefing to Congress mentioned assets of unknown origin in Earth orbit that pose potential security risks. The briefing was leaked partially. It described objects that have been present since before the space age. Objects that demonstrate awareness of human spacecraft. Objects that cannot be attributed to any terrestrial nation. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched in 2021, has capabilities that were not publicly disclosed. Among them, the ability to detect low albedo objects in Earth orbit. Dark things that do not reflect much light. Things like the Black Knight. James Webb's Earth observation data is classified at levels usually reserved for nuclear weapons intelligence. What has James Webb seen? Why is the data restricted? What would happen if the public knew what was really in orbit above us? Commercial satellite companies have their own encounters. SpaceX, conducting thousands of Starlink launches, has reported numerous near misses with uncatalogued objects. Some of these objects appear to shadow Starlink satellites, matching their orbits precisely before moving away, as if studying them, learning their capabilities. OneWeb, another satellite constellation company, lost communication with 14 satellites simultaneously in 2022. The satellites were in different orbits, thousands of miles apart. The failure lasted exactly 13 minutes before all systems restored normally. No explanation was found, but technicians noted that during the blackout, the satellites' positions shifted slightly, as if something had moved them. China's space station, Tiangong, has reported multiple proximity events with dark objects that do not appear on any tracking database. The Chinese military has standing orders to photograph any such encounters. Those photographs are never released, but sources within the program describe objects that match the Black Knight profile. Angular, black, wrong. The International Space Station has its own secret history with the Black Knight. Astronauts are briefed on anomalous orbital phenomena before missions. They are told to report but not discuss certain observations. The ISS has dedicated cameras that point away from Earth, officially for astronomical observation. Unofficially, they track things that should not be there. In 2020, ISS crew member Ivan Vanner posted a video of 5 objects in formation passing the station. Roscosmos quickly deleted the post and issued a statement about space debris. But the objects in the video were luminous, moving in perfect synchronization, accelerating without visible propulsion. They matched no known debris pattern. The patterns are accelerating. More sightings, more interactions, more direct contact with human spacecraft. The Black Knight and its companions are becoming less subtle, less concerned with concealment, as if a deadline approaches where secrecy no longer matters. The magnetic pole coordinates transmitted in 1979 point to approximately 14,000 CE. If the Black Knight arrived around 12,000 BCE, that is a 26,000-year span. Significant because that is one complete axial precession cycle of Earth. The time it takes for the planet's wobble to complete one full rotation. An astronomical cycle that affects climate, ocean currents, and potentially civilization itself. Are we approaching the end of a monitored cycle? Is the Black Knight preparing a final report before something changes? Before something arrives? Before something ends? The heartbeat sound recorded by STS-88 might be the most disturbing evidence. If real, it suggests the Black Knight is not purely mechanical. There is something biological integrated into its structure, or something that mimics biology. The knocking behavior supports this. Deliberate, rhythmic, like something trying to communicate through the only medium available in vacuum. Physical vibration through contact. What intelligence guides the Black Knight? Is it an AI programmed 13,000 years ago? A preserved consciousness from its builders? Or something actively piloted from elsewhere, using the probe as a remote presence? The responses to human activity suggest real-time decision-making, not pre-programmed behavior. The acceleration of contact might reflect our own development. As we become more capable in space, the Black Knight becomes more active, testing our responses, evaluating our reactions, determining if we are ready for the next phase, or determining if we have developed too far and need to be reset like the civilizations before us. Ancient texts describe previous apocalypses, floods, fires, plagues. Each one ended an age of humanity. Each one was followed by rebuilding, guided by gods or angels or beings from the stars. The same beings who placed watchers in the sky to observe the new iteration. The Black Knight might be that watcher, recording our rise, waiting for the signal to initiate our fall. The countdown that started 13,000 years ago approaches zero. The coordinates point to a future we might not see. The heartbeat in space might be counting down to silence. NASA knows more than they admit. The Space Force tracks things they will not discuss. Governments worldwide have classified programs studying objects that should not exist. They all reach the same conclusion. Something is in orbit that predates human spaceflight. Something that watches. Something that waits. The public sees fragments. A photograph here. A leaked document there. A retired astronaut's confession. But the full picture remains hidden. Perhaps because the truth would cause panic. Perhaps because there is nothing we can do about it. Perhaps because some secrets are too dark for daylight. The Black Knight satellite exists. The evidence is overwhelming despite official denials. It has been in orbit for millennia, possibly since the end of the last ice age. It observes Earth with capabilities we do not understand. It responds to our presence in space with increasing boldness. And it might be counting down to something we are not prepared to face. Every radio signal we have broadcast has been heard. Every rocket we have launched has been observed. Every step we have taken toward the stars has been recorded. The Black Knight has witnessed humanity's entire technological evolution. It knows our capabilities, our weaknesses, our location in the cosmos. The question is not whether the Black Knight exists. The evidence answers that definitively. The question is why it exists. Who put it there? What are they waiting for? And what happens when the waiting ends? Tesla heard it in 1899. The Navy tracked it in 1960. NASA photographed it in 1998. Each encounter provided a piece of the puzzle. Together, they form a picture of persistent surveillance by something beyond our understanding. Something that has watched civilizations rise and fall. Something that might be preparing to watch another fall. The countdown continues. The Black Knight tumbles through the void, angular and wrong against the stars. It transmits its data to receivers we cannot locate. It follows programming we cannot decipher. It serves masters we have never met, yet. But the patterns suggest change. The increased activity, the direct contact, the biological sounds, the future coordinates, all point to an approaching culmination. A 13,000-year mission reaching its conclusion. A report being finalized. A decision being made. We have assumed the Black Knight is watching. But watching implies passivity. What if it is waiting? Waiting for specific conditions. Waiting for us to reach a certain level. Waiting for orders. Waiting for the optimal moment to act. The heartbeat in space might not be a heartbeat at all. It might be a countdown timer. each pulse marking another second toward zero, toward activation, toward whatever purpose has kept the Black Knight in orbit since before human civilization began. The coordinates transmitted to the Soviets mark a point 12,000 years in our future. But they might not be predictive. They might be prescriptive. Not where the poles will be, but where they need to be. The Black Knight might not be observing planetary mechanics but preparing to alter them. Magnetic pole shifts cause chaos. Navigation fails. Animals lose migration routes. The magnetosphere weakens. Solar radiation increases. Technology collapses. Civilization resets. The survivors rebuild from scratch, guided by the gods who return after the catastrophe. The cycle repeats. Is this humanity's fate? To rise and fall in predetermined cycles while something watches from orbit? To develop just far enough before being reset? To serve as an experiment that runs for millennia before the data is harvested and the subjects are cleared? The Black Knight holds these answers. Somewhere in its ancient circuits or biological components is the truth about humanity's purpose, about our origins, about our fate. But it is not talking. It is just watching, waiting, counting down. The next time you look at the night sky, remember that something up there is looking back. Something that was ancient when the pyramids were young. Something that has seen every human who ever lived. Something that knows how the story ends because it has seen it end before. The Black Knight satellite. 13,000 years of surveillance compressed into an angular shadow against the stars. A witness to humanity's entire history. A herald of its possible end. A reminder that we are neither alone nor in control. The countdown continues. The heartbeat persists. The watching never stops. Until one day it does. And then we will finally learn what the Black Knight has been waiting for. What it has been counting down to. What comes next.